Hearing now come to order. Good morning and welcome to today's Research and Science Education Subcommittee hearing. The big smile you may see on my face this morning is not only because I'm passionate about this issue, but because the Chicago Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup last night for the first time in my lifetime. So very happy about that. But didn't get as much sleep as I would usually like to, but here we are this morning. It's going to be a very good hearing, and so there's going to be no problems at all keeping me awake and attentive. This morning we're taking an in-depth look at how we turn new knowledge and technologies created at our universities and colleges into products, companies, and jobs. I'm particularly excited about this topic because of my experience as a university professor and my recognition that America's international competitiveness and economic growth will increasingly depend on successful technology transfer from lab to marketplace. At a time when we are increasingly asking a question, where will new American jobs come from? We need to be looking more closely at how we can best help our universities filled with the world's best researchers, how we can best help them continue to be economic engines that power America's future. Let me begin by making one point clear. Our competitors have noticed how well our system works, and many are trying to imitate it. Countries like China and members of the European Union are now investing heavily in their own R&D programs. Combined business and government spending on R&D in China, for example, has been increasing by almost 20% a year over the past decade. And China has already overtaken Japan as the #2 publisher of scientific articles. They're determined to move up the value chain, and we need sustained investments and smart policies if we want to remain the world leader in science and technology. 2 weeks ago, we took a big step forward when the House passed the America Competes Reauthorization Act. This bill includes substantial new investments in basic and applied research, a skilled STEM workforce, the kind of public-private partnerships that facilitate technology transfer, and in research infrastructure, including mid-scale research instrumentation and university infrastructure, which was a special focus of mine in developing the bill. Included in the Competes Act is my 5-year reauthorization of the National Science Foundation, whose primary mission is supporting fundamental research in developing STEM professionals across almost all disciplines of science and engineering. This bill would double NSF funding, much of which would go to our colleges and universities. In discussing technology transfer programs, it is important to remember that although innovations often begin with these kinds of federal investments, the path from the lab bench to the marketplace is anything but straightforward. It depends on a complicated network of private companies, scientists, universities, venture capitalists, startups, and entrepreneurs. It also depends on luck, timing, and to some extent location. Some universities have more successful tech transfer offices. Some scientists are better prepared or more inclined to engage with the business community. And some parts of the country have cultivated networks of entrepreneurs and venture capitalists who know how to turn an idea into a product that can transform our everyday lives. According to a survey by Association of University Technology Managers, the number of academic invention disclosures filed, the number of U.S. patent applications filed, and the number of university spin-off companies formed have all grown significantly over the past few years. But the survey also indicates a wide range of success across our academic institutions, with licensing income varying from nearly nothing to almost $800 million. In order to strengthen the current system and improve the return on federal research spending, it is imperative that we gain a better understanding of this process from multiple perspectives. I'm interested in hearing from today's witnesses about best practices or policies that can improve the technology transfer process and the appropriate role of the National Science Foundation in supporting such efforts. I also hope to hear your thoughts on the role of regional networks, how we can improve collaboration between scientists entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists, and how we can better track and quantify the impact of both technology transfer activities and research spending. Finally, I'd like to learn what impact the recession is having on the creation of new startups, and to hear the witnesses' ideas on how we can make sure that American discoveries turn into American companies and American jobs. I thank all the witnesses for being here and look forward to your testimony. The chair will now recognize Dr. Ehlers for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize to you and the audience for being a bit late. I was in a meeting which, much to my surprise, turned out to be related to this issue. I was meeting with David Brooks, the columnist for the New York Times, and one of the brightest lights, I think, and not only at the New York Times, but in the American press. And he was discussing issues related to this and how in the research he's done and uncovered, the educated but not highly educated individuals in America do not see the need for doing research, for really trying to develop ideas that are found that way. It just should sort of happen naturally with the economic system we have, and failing to recognize the need for everyone to participate in those ideas. And that has direct bearing on what we're talking about today. In today's hearing, I'm very anxious to learn about partnerships between universities and industry and how the National Science Foundation is supporting these relationships. I've also been an advocate ever since I got here of the research and development tax credit to encourage industries to engage in research. And I find it a travesty that the best I've been able to obtain is year-by-year increases or tax rates. Most bean counters and corporate executives cannot make long-term decisions or judgments based on an annual phenomenon. And so we really should work on that as well. I understand that the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee of this committee will be undertaking a comprehensive review of both the Bayh-Dole Act and the Stevenson-Weidler Technology Innovation Act later this year. And I hope that this subcommittee will work closely with the other subcommittee on this series of hearings, since we should always be considering the value of commercialization to comprehensive STEM education provided at our universities. It may even be appropriate to consider some joint subcommittee hearings dependent on context. I suspect that most university partnerships are overwhelmingly fruitful relationships, but I think we need to be mindful of some of the unintended consequences as well. While they are in school, students should be able to explore the scientific process, and universities must establish standards for these partnerships that protect students from being transformed into cheap labor for industry. It is my hope that the witnesses testing before us today, and I'm pleased to have such a distinguished panel here, it's my hope that the witnesses will offer this committee insight into ways to improve university-industry technology transfer partnerships and to explore the appropriate federal role. I look forward to the testimony of each of our members of our panel. I thank all of you for being here. But I also want to add a comment of former Speaker Newt Gingrich, who is always a strong supporter of scientific research and technology. And he has repeatedly said in his speeches during the last few years that his greatest mistake as Speaker of the House was doubling the NIH allocation for research while not also doubling the NSF allocation. And I totally agree with him. I fought for it at the time. I'm sorry that I did not succeed, but I hope that in the future we will adequately improve the National Science Foundation budget so that the partnerships we're examining today have a greater chance of success. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Dr. Tom Peterson is the Assistant Director for the Directorate of Engineering at the National Science Foundation. Ms. Lesa Mitchell is the Vice President of Advancing Innovation at the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. Mr. Mark Crowell is the Executive Director and Associate Vice President for Innovation Partnerships and Commercialization at the University of Virginia. Mr. Wayne Watkins is the Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Akron. Mr. Keith Crandell is the co-founder and managing director of Arch Venture Partners. Arch Venture Partners is unique in the Midwest for really going in and finding those who are doing exactly what we're talking about today, going from the university bench and bringing those products to the market. And finally, we have Mr. Neil Kane, who is the president and co-founder of Advanced Diamond Technologies, Inc. ADT is the world leader in development of diamond for industrial, electronics, energy, and medical applications. And Mr. Kane is also the former executive director of the Illinois Technology Enterprise Center at Argonne National Lab, an entrepreneur in residence with Illinois Ventures. So, welcome our witnesses. And as you should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will include in the record for the hearing. When you've all completed your spoken testimony, we'll begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. So we will start right now with Dr. Peterson.
Thank you, Chairman Lipinski, ranking members, Ranking Member Ehlers, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the process by which knowledge and technology are transferred from the academic institutions to the private sector. I'm Tom Peterson, the Assistant Director for the Engineering Directorate at the National Science Foundation. As NSF's investments in basic research and education bear fruit, we support the translational research as part of our investment portfolio to show the best stewardship of the funds with which we are entrusted. In a recent survey conducted by the Independent Science Coalition, fully 1/3 of the companies they studied started with the help of federally funded research, depended on research supported by the National Science Foundation. Our success stories in improving tech transfer, then, are built both on programs with long histories at NSF, as well as through new programs designed to expand our capabilities to contribute to the innovation ecosystem. In my written testimony, I provide in some detail descriptions of a wide range of NSF programs, focusing on the important task of facilitating the commercialization of NSF-funded research. In the short time I have with you this morning, I'll give you a sampling of those programs and some specific examples of successful transfer of research discovery to the marketplace. The Engineering Research Centers, established in 1985, or the ERCs, constitute the flagship engineering centers program at NSF. From 1985 through 2009, ERCs have produced 1,700 invention disclosures, 625 patents, 2,100 patent and software licenses, and have spun off 142 firms. Most importantly, they've produced more than 10,000 graduates at all levels who are truly the best means for tech transfer. In the 1990s, the Engineering Research Center on Data Storage Systems at Carnegie Mellon developed a nickel aluminum underlayer that is the primary technology behind high-capacity storage devices in laptops, MP3 players, and other consumer electronics. More recently, the ERC for Collaborative Adaptive Sensing in the Atmosphere at UMass Amherst developed a more sensitive radar network for detecting low-altitude weather phenomena, thereby adding valuable minutes to the warning time at the onset of tornadoes. The Industry University Cooperative Research Centers, or IUCRCs, is the oldest centers program, and it consists of small interdisciplinary groups of faculty and students focusing on industry-relevant research. Currently, there are 52 active IUCRCs, and this highly leveraged program has established over 1,000 industry connections to about 150 different universities. The IUCRC for Engineering, Logistics, and Distribution at the University of Arkansas, for example, works with Walmart and has developed logistics software that's resulted in a more than 4% reduction in inventory costs. NSF's Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Tech Transfer programs, designed to increase the commercial application of federally supported research results, has produced over 1,000 high-tech small businesses since the congressional legislation that began the program in 1982. I conclude my testimony this morning with one final example of NSF basic research which has found its way into the marketplace. In the early 1990s, we supported an engineering research center on optoelectronic computing systems at the University of Colorado and Colorado State University. That center was led by a brilliant and energetic professor named Christina Johnson, who developed a line of 3D imaging components for scientific and industrial applications, and with colleagues spun out some of the ERC's innovations with support from NSF's STTR program into a company called ColorLink in Boulder, Colorado. In 2007, that company was acquired by Real D Cinema out of Beverly Hills, and in the hands of filmmakers, the ERC technology was the basis for the blockbuster film Avatar, which introduced to a worldwide audience a new generation of 3D cinematic experience. In fact, the film won a 2009 Academy Award for visual effects, based in part on this innovative 3D technology. By the way, that Professor Johnson, who helped develop the technology, now serves as the Undersecretary for Energy in the Department of Energy. In summary, the Engineering Directorate takes very seriously its responsibility to show leadership within the NSF in bridging basic research discovery to market commercialization. Our research portfolio is a balance of support for basic research as well as these translational research areas, which constitute and contribute vitally to innovation. Equally important, by maintaining a healthy connection with business and industry through translational research activities, we further enhance our basic research portfolio through new ideas generated by our industry partners. In short, it's beneficial to both our academic researchers and to the marketplace that we continue to foster these strong ties between NSF and the real world. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Ms. Mitchell.
Chairman Lipinski and members of the subcommittee. Oh, thank you. Ooh, Chairman Lipinski and members of the subcommittee. And I think we need a napkin. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before the subcommittee focused on the role of improving technology commercialization of government-funded research and how it can play as a driver in economic growth and job creation. If there is a silver lining to the economic crisis our country now faces, it is that policymakers and academics as well as citizens are now paying tremendous attention to job creation and economic growth. For far too long, the sources of job creation have been taken for granted. The Ewing, Marion Kauffman Foundation is one of the largest funders of economic research focused on innovation and entrepreneurship, and we welcome the renewed focus on these issues generally, as well as the more narrowly focused conversation we will be having today on technology commercialization. In my testimony today, I will highlight three main policy proposals and can review the Kauffman Foundation's current thinking on best practices in technology commercialization. First, we call for a transparency of research resulting from federal funding through the creation of an innovation exchange. Secondly, we encourage federal agencies funding research to become more involved with driving university-specific improvements in technology commercialization. While we would agree that we have done well and other countries are following our lead, we also believe that we could do better. While we are very supportive of Bayh-Dole as good policy, we believe it has not been consistently implemented and that we need to look at opportunities for market forces to help that process. Thirdly, we call for an increase in funding allocations for proof of concept centers and commercialization education programs through federal agencies funding research. It has long been known that universities play an important role in economic growth, dating back to the 1800s when land-grant universities were created to provide skilled people and new research knowledge for a growing economy. The way we perceive and manage this role has changed, however. Universities now are expected to generate growth rather than merely sustain or support it. They accomplish this through generating new knowledge, producing graduates, and licensing innovations, or actually, in many cases, creating new companies. Federal funding of research provides a critical base for most of these applications. Most federal-funded university research is already supported precisely because it promises to contribute to a government mission such as health, national defense, energy production, or environmental protection. In the life sciences in particular, most research is conducted squarely in what Princeton University political science professor Donald Stokes termed Pasteur's quadrant, where research is both scientifically valuable and also immensely practical. We would argue that most efforts to increase commercialization can be achieved at relatively small marginal cost and can occur in ways that benefit both science and society. There is no single model for success. We have highlighted in my remarks and in my detailed testimony some basic elements, but they may need to be applied in different ways, as the chairman alluded to previously. What works best at each university may depend on its research strengths, the nature of the related industries, the nature of the regions, big cities, rural communities, etc., and other variables. The only common thread is the need for a well-developed ecosystem of innovation. In high-growth regions with highly entrepreneurial universities, the following tend to be true of the faculty. They have frequent and extensive contact with private industry, which attunes them to thinking in terms of practical value creation while enabling them to share their expertise. High-growth regions operate with university policies that encourage such activities. Rather than laboring against policies that draw barriers between the academic and commercial realms. Magic bullets may score occasional hits, but ecosystems flourish with many pathways to the commercialization market. We call on you to increase the transparency of research resulting from federal funding through the creation of an innovation exchange, to encourage federal agencies funding research to become involved in institution-specific technology commercialization effectiveness reviews. And lastly, to increase funding allocations for proof-of-concept centers and commercialization education programs. Thank you for your invitation to present to the committee today.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. And now move on to Mr. Crowell.
Thank you. Chairman Lipinski and Ranking Member Ehlers, thank you for the opportunity to testify before the House Science and Technology Subcommittee on Research and Science Education. My name is Mark Crowell. As of about 2 weeks ago, I am the Executive Director and Associate Vice President for Innovation Partnerships and Commercialization at the University of Virginia. I took this job because I believe UVA is at the forefront of research universities in advancing an institution-wide innovation agenda, and I intend to share and help lead UVA's vision for transforming the way ideas flow from universities to the world. I'm a 23-year member of the technology transfer profession and previously led programs at the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla and Palm Beach, at Duke, at North Carolina State University, and at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And Mr. Chairman, I'm a Tar Heel basketball fan, just to get that out of the way. During 2005, I also served as president of the Association of University Technology Managers, or AUTM, a global organization of more than 3,500 technology transfer professionals. In my 23 years of experience, I have witnessed the technology transfer profession evolve from a function of secondary importance into a key component of the teaching, research, public service, and engagement missions of the university. The technology transfer function of the 1980s and much of the 90s was largely reactive, non-market driven, and completely separate from concepts like regional economies and innovation ecosystems. Let me stress, I believe this is yesterday's news and that these perceptions no longer should guide public policy. Fast forward, in fact, through the 1990s to today, and the profession and practice is markedly different. As I will outline via some best practice examples, technology transfer offices are sophisticated business and innovation development engines, and the people who run them are highly skilled and come from a broad array of fields. Yes, we still have administrative responsibilities, but most of us are nerve centers on our campuses for innovation partnerships and commercialization, and are key parts of our regional innovation economies. The impact of these efforts is especially easy to see in regions acknowledged to be leaders in technology-based economic development. The example I know best is Research Triangle Park, but similar stories are available or are evolving in other regions where research universities are ramping up their innovation and partnership activities. My written statement contains much more detail about Research Triangle Park and the way in which it evolved during the 1990s and early 2000s as an innovation and entrepreneurial hotspot with impressive growth in company launches, new jobs, and other indicators. And it documents the parallel and dramatic investments in academic technology transfer during this period, as well as the impact of a regional licensing consortium serving 3 of the research universities there. As noted, the scale and focus of academic technology transfer, translational research, and business development initiatives have evolved in numerous ways. A partial list of best practices includes the following. 1, startup company development activities. According to Autumn's most recent survey, almost 600 university spinoffs were formed in 2008 alone. 2, entrepreneurship training for students and faculty are now part of the academic landscape, or as the former chancellor of UNC Chapel Hill indicated, they're part of the weave and fabric of the institution. Working with partners like the Kauffman Foundation or regional innovation partners like the Council for Entrepreneurial Development or CONNECT, entrepreneurship education and training activities are available for postdocs, graduate students, undergrads, faculty, and others. 3, critical pre-seed and seed capital resources and networks are being launched. It is well documented that institutional venture capital has moved further downstream and that a vast gap exists between early-stage university technology and marketplace investment opportunities. At the University of Virginia, as an example, we recently held our 2nd annual UVA Venture Summit. In each of its first 2 years, the UVA Venture Summit attracted venture capital funds managing more than $15 billion. In the first year, each of the 8 UVA companies presenting received funding. 4, proof of concept and translational research programs are becoming commonplace best practices. Again, an example from the University of Virginia is the Wallace Coulter Foundation Translational Research Partnership, which funds a project manager and about 8 projects per year. Results from this activity indicate that there have been 20 new patent disclosures per $1 million invested, and that 50% of funded projects over the first 4 years have moved to a commercial license within 2 years, all metrics that greatly exceed traditional academic research metrics. UVA officials attribute the success of the Coulter project to the high-touch involvement of a diverse project review board that involves industry personnel, investment capital, and others. At the University of Virginia, we strongly believe that enhanced federal funding by NSF and others for proof of concept and translational research initiatives similar to these examples will lead to the harnessing of what economist Paul Romer calls the countless discoveries required for economic growth by linking the people that make them with other participants in the innovation ecosystem. I thank you for the opportunity to be here today and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Crowell, and I will, even though you're a Tar Heels fan, I'll apologize for getting your name incorrect the first couple times. Now I'll move on to Mr. Watkins.
Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Ehlers, members of the subcommittee. I am Wayne Watkins. I'm the Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Akron and Treasurer of the University of Akron Research Foundation. And we very much appreciate this invitation to submit written testimony and to highlight a couple of our observations and recommendations. Observation 1, the innovation effectiveness of universities is a function of university leadership at all levels, demonstrating that they are committed to innovation. It is a function of quality research. It is a function of having porous boundaries and boundary-spanning strategies between universities and industries. It is a function of providing the full range of innovation expertise and services, not just patent procurement and licensing. It is also a function of effective education and training related to innovation. Observation number 2. Technology transfer offices are increasingly providing multiple innovation services. They must be flexible for each specific situation. The model for congregating and deploying a full range of innovation expertise and services established at the University of Akron demonstrates the capacity of a mid-sized public university to foster innovation. I might mention one of our more rewarding initiatives, and that is of designating and hosting passionate and savvy industry retirees as University Research Foundation Senior Fellows, who as volunteers bridge the boundaries, the cultures, the technologies between universities and industry. The Senior Fellows as fully integrated members of the University Technology Transfer Team, reach into the university and reach out to industry to train, make connections, identify challenges, find opportunities, and find resources. Observation number 3, we very much appreciate the role of government in our innovation ecosystem. The government best contributes to innovation by being the major sponsor of basic and applied research, by providing an effective patent system that rewards novel inventions and provides for rapid public disclosure of inventions. The government further contributes to innovation effectiveness by supporting a business environment that encourages investment in innovation-related risk-taking, and one that minimizes regulation and other burdens to only that which is essential. The government also best contributes by providing appropriate commercialization infrastructure support. Recommendations. First, the government should fund the experimentation of and the development of sustainable and effective innovation expertise congregators and service providers on a multi-institutional and regional basis, and in some cases focused on specific technologies or specific markets, such as energy or advanced materials. 2, the government should expand its use of commercialization grants, particularly where the markets alone do not adequately incentivize the commercialization. The SBIR, with the concept of supplemental grants, is an excellent example and an excellent program. 3, the government should expect the recipients of federal research funding to promptly make public the invention disclosures after the intellectual property protection is secured, and that has to be balanced with industry's need for proprietary and keeping things confidential. The government should also expect that recipients of federal research funding have effective innovation and commercialization capacity. However, to be effective, we need to realize that they're situation specific, and each environment has to respond to their own resources and their own situations. The government, as universities, however, we really need to be the ones to demonstrate our expertise and our effectiveness in translating knowledge into products and services. Notwithstanding that our research universities have served the citizens of the United States long and well, we are at risk given the financial crises and related economic downturn, the growing international competition, and our waning educational attainment performance. Thus, as a country, we must leverage all available resources, and especially our nation's universities, in concert with industry and the government, to transform our national competitiveness through innovation. To that end, our universities need to continuously reinvent themselves to be increasingly relevant and to be primary drivers of innovation. Conventional thinking that universities are incapable of effective innovation and marketplace relevance is wrong. Likewise, any thoughts that universities, industry, or government alone will drive innovation is wrong. All 3 sectors are essential, all have room for improvement, and thus we must help each other. There is tremendous latent capacity for innovation in our society. It needs to be unleashed, and we believe appropriate rewards from the federal government will help universities and businesses become the innovation proficient as we seek to inspire, develop, and send to the markets the innovations that improve our quality of life and our economic security. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Mr. Crandell.
Chairman Lipinski, ranking member, elders, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Keith Crandell, and I am co-founder and managing director of Arch Venture Partners, an independent seed and early stage venture capital fund. I'm especially pleased to be here today as a resident of Hinsdale, Illinois, testifying before my neighbor, Congressman Lipinski, who resides in nearby Western Springs. Arch has got our start, my partners and I, by being the managers of a innovative commercialization effort out of the University of Chicago and Argonne National Labs that was spawned following the passing of the Bayh-Dole Act in the 80s. My partners and I had basically the rights to the technology at the University of Chicago and Argonne put into this subsidiary of the University of Chicago, which was chartered to start new companies from the research there. We raised a small venture capital fund from financial investors of $9 million, did 12 companies with that, ultimately took 4 public, sold 4, wrote off 4. The successes from that first fund include the Everyday Mathematics Company, which is the #1 math curriculum in the United States today. Nanophase Technologies, which The Economist identified as the first nanotechnology company, and then Averon, which does the cold-adapted flu vaccine that's sprayed into the noses of children to vaccinate them against various diseases. I'm pleased to be here today to share with you some thoughts on how to improve the technology transfer of breakthrough ideas and technologies from our nation's research institutions. Venture capital plays a critical role in the innovation life cycle by identifying and investing in promising ideas, entrepreneurs, and companies. Often these companies are formed from ideas and entrepreneurs doing work in universities, industry, and government laboratories. Many would never see the light of day were it not for venture investment. The historic impact on the U.S. economy in terms of jobs created and innovation from venture capital investment is significant. According to a 2009 study conducted by Global Insights, companies that were started with venture capital since 1970 accounted for 12.1 million jobs, or 11% of the private sector employment, and almost $3 trillion in revenue in the United States in the year 2008. Former venture-backed companies like FedEx, Genentech, Microsoft, Google, and Apple were once small ideas tucked away in a lab or a living room, and that's where tomorrow's great innovations will be coming from. Technology commercialization effectiveness differs greatly from one research institution to another, but there are three primary functions most technology transfer offices perform. The first is record keeping and compliance, and I think most universities can adequately carry out that function. The second is patenting and licensing. I think too often the staffs in the technology transfer offices do not have the resources necessary to gain full knowledge of how research can be translated into commercial applications for specific patents, and as a result, poorly drafted patent claims can result, in which case you can have a great innovation but a very narrow patent, and that stifles innovation. Second, I think in the past 10 years, license agreement templates have been published which simplify the licensing process quite a bit. However, these agreements still take too long to negotiate from a startup company's viewpoint. The startup cannot get to the real work of hiring management, product development, and raising capital until it secures its license and knows its economic terms. The third and most critical commercialization function is forming and spinning off startups based on those patented and licensed innovations. Unfortunately, this tends to be a particularly difficult and thankless task, since university tech transfer offices are too often not given enough resources and skilled personnel needed to perform the job, nor are they recognized for the value they contribute to an organization that is designed first and foremost to serve faculty and students. Successful new company formation requires three basic components to be brought together: leading researchers with breakthrough ideas, successful entrepreneurial managers, and lastly, experienced seed and early stage investors. These interdisciplinary teams of scientists, managers, and innovators and investors have been the hallmark of successful high-growth companies. Some areas like Silicon Valley have an abundance of all three components, but other regions that may have excellent research lack the other parts of the system. In those regions where venture capital and entrepreneurial talent are scarce, a much heavier burden is placed on the commercialization staff to spin off companies. There are several principles that define successful commercialization processes. I'll briefly touch on these. There's more detail in my written testimony. The objective commercialization metrics are of critical importance. My sense is that counting things that are the easiest to count, such as visits or invention disclosures, are not particularly indicative of the success of commercialization efforts. I think those metrics should focus on things such as capital raised and jobs created. I think there needs to be an enhancement in the resources that are focused on the leading scientists. I'll call it the top 1%, since historically this is where the breakthroughs have come from. I think pure scientists with successful entrepreneurial experience make the best judges of those efforts. I think researchers need to be able to fully participate in the entrepreneurial process without unnecessary encumbrance from archaic conflict of interest policies. The standard of conduct for scientists involved in entrepreneurial activity should be actual conflict, not the appearance of conflict, as is the standard in some institutions today, primarily the national lab system. If you go with the appearance of conflict standard, it allows mid-level managers with programmatic responsibilities to quash the entrepreneurial activity to pointing to less than substantive violations of those standards. We'd like to see an improvement in encouraging exclusive licenses. I think 25 years after the Bayh-Dole Act, it's absolutely clear that in order to raise capital, you need to have the ability to cut exclusive licenses with a minimal amount of time to getting those completed, and that's still an area that needs work. And then finally, I'd like to say that we would like to see the SBIR program not disqualify investor-backed companies from applying for grants. I think this is particularly damaging to companies seeking capital that are in remote geographies where it's harder to attract investor capital. The National Science Foundation has their sponsored research has played an important role in innovation ecosystems. NSF is highly regarded by the seed and early stage venture capital groups because of their long-term view, interdisciplinary research, and careful program selection and rigorous peer review. The NSF could take a more active catalytic role in encouraging commercialization in several ways. First, the foundation can help expand the innovation ecosystem, particularly in those geographic regions that possess top-flight research that I discussed earlier, but lack the seasoned entrepreneur and investor components necessary to complete the transfer process. The NSF should fund the formation of public-private partnerships at these research institutions to focus exclusively on identifying startup opportunities and assembling interdisciplinary teams required to build innovations into successful high-growth companies. The NSF may be uniquely suited to facilitate this partnership because of its deep relationships with leading scientists, many of which have had successful startups emerge from their labs. Second, the NSF can rethink the artificial separation of basic and applied research. To paraphrase an entrepreneurial chemist from Argonne National Labs some years ago, there are plenty of great basic research problems with commercial significance if you are looking for them. The point here is, if generating an eventual commercial application is the desired goal of basic research, or one of them, then it makes sense to design the programs to allocate resources to identify, investigate, and validate the commercial implications of basic research from the very beginning. It's simply never too early to start this complementary commercial investigation process. I'd like to conclude my testimony by reiterating that the innovation ecosystem in the U.S. remains the envy of the world. It's harnessed the brilliance of our researchers, the ingenuity of our entrepreneurs, and the savvy of our investors. However, it's a frail ecosystem, and as members of this unique public-private partnership, we must do everything we can to remove and mitigate those challenges to the system that are under our control. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crandell. Mr. Kane.
I'm Neil Kane, President and co-founder of Advanced Diamond Technologies. I'd like to thank Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Ehlers, and the other members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. In the last 15 years, I've been founder or startup executive in 6 university spinoffs, and I've been associated with many more. As the executive director of the Entrepreneurship Center at Argonne National Laboratory, our charter was to mine Argonne's portfolio of research projects and identify those that were the best candidates for launching startup businesses. I later became entrepreneur in residence for the venture arm of the University of Illinois, where for 3 years I helped start businesses based on research conducted there. Through these experiences and the 4 years since then that I've been full-time CEO of Advanced Diamond Technologies, I've encountered every small business and tech transfer issue there is. Advanced Diamond Technologies is a nanotechnology company. We literally turn 50 cents worth of natural gas into $500 worth of diamond in our plant near Chicago. We don't make jewelry, but the diamond that we make is used in a variety of industrial applications such as highly durable bearings, electronics such as timing chips for phased array radars for the military, and medical devices like heart pumps. Notably, all of the products that we manufacture today and export were the subject of SBIR awards. We're building domestic manufacturing capacity and creating highly skilled jobs. In fact, 3/4 of our 16 employees have advanced degrees. And as has been noted already by Chairman Lipinski, I should point out that not surprisingly, our most serious competition comes from China. Not only are their costs lower there, as everybody understands, but their government is also funding advanced technologies like ours much more aggressively than the U.S. is today. As I've persevered through some of the challenges encountered when transferring technologies from universities or federal labs, the major issues that I've identified are these 4. Number 1, as you've already heard from others, the transaction costs of executing licenses is too high. Number 2, Professors or career researchers who are integral to the success of startups sometimes face institutional impediments that inhibit their participation, conflicts of interest, and other types of things. These same professors or career researchers, while obviously highly intelligent, lack business experience, and that needs to be addressed. In every startup that I've been a part of, some or all of the key research was conducted by a foreign-born student. These graduate students or postdocs are then prohibited from working in the companies that they spin off due to immigration restrictions. This reduces the chance of success for the company and also deprives the community of the opportunity to employ a highly skilled worker. When it comes to job creation, these are the easiest jobs to create. And finally, funding the valley of death, the gap that exists between applied research on the one hand and commercial traction on the other. This continues to be an enormous challenge for most commercially oriented technology businesses. And in response, I offer these 5 recommendations to address these issues. Number 1, the Bayh-Dole Act should be modified so that all patent licenses executed under its purview are made publicly available. In the era of transparent government, I'll call this the License Agreement Sunshine Act. By doing so and making licenses exposable to the public, it will lower transaction costs by making licensing terms and conditions more standardized, and notably, as you've heard from Mr. Crandell, it will also dramatically shorten negotiations. Number 2, create an entrepreneurial special duty assignment for researchers in federal laboratories to give them the chance to properly transfer their technology and skills without sacrificing their professional tenure or salary. Number 3, make universities provide business skills to STEM students. Large companies can offer training like the one that I got when I began my career with IBM, but small businesses cannot afford to do so. Horizontal skills like project management, budgeting, written and verbal communications, presentation skills, and basic sales skills are valuable regardless of career choice. Better-rounded technical workers will earn higher salaries regardless of vocation, and I can tell you firsthand that all of the employees that we've had in my companies who haven't survived, it's usually been due to their horizontal skills and social skills, not their technical skills. Number 4, increase the limits on SBIR and STTR awards and collapse the approval times. Sometimes it takes up to 9 months, and these are cycles that startup companies cannot tolerate. And number 5, modify the SBA size standards to reflect the needs of very small businesses. As you know, the SBA defines a small business as one with less than 500 employees. My company with 16 employees doesn't have very much in common with companies that have 450 or 500 employees. The SBA needs to recognize and define programs appropriate for businesses with less than 50 employees, much like other federal legislation does. In conclusion, we at Advanced Diamond Technologies are developing important new technologies, generating good jobs, and exporting products today, specifically because of the taxpayer investments in basic and applied research, augmented by the availability of SBIR funding through NSF. Tech transfer is an investment in our innovation economy, and I encourage you to implement the changes I've proposed to stimulate this activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane, and I'm sure I would have known by now if you were related to Patrick Kane, who scored the game-winning goal last night, so I assume you're not.
Unfortunately, not.
But that could be a good selling point that maybe you could try to use back home.
It's nice to see jerseys with Kane on them all over Chicago.
I think they're all for you. Before we get into questioning, the one thing I wanted to mention that Mr. Crandell raised this issue about the exclusion of startup companies in SBIR that involve venture capitalists. And the House bill did not exclude venture capitalists. The Senate bill does, and that's a battle that we have still ongoing there. But I wanted to put that out there, and I never miss an opportunity to tweak the Senate for something they're doing wrong. But with that, I'm going to first recognize for 5 minutes Ms. Fudge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank all of you for being here today and sharing your expertise. It was very interesting to hear your views. I happen to be from Ohio as well, and I am fortunate to represent Case Western Reserve University, one of the nation's top research institutions. And what you're talking about today is of particular interest to Case and to myself. So my first question for any of the panelists. The Kauffman Foundation has recommended that university tech transfer would be improved if university inventors and not technology transfer offices controlled patent licensing. Do you agree or disagree? Anyone?
Wants to start? Okay. I will start. We have tremendous respect for the Kauffman Foundation, and we agree with them on 99.9% of everything they do. I think it is problematic when the ownership of a property and the control of a property are separated. And so I think their point that there ought to be flexibility in terms of how technologies are commercialized is a good point, but making it mandatory, I think, is problematic.
Thank you. Okay. My second question is for Ms. Mitchell. Are the Kauffman Foundation's efforts to improve the efficiency of academic tech transfer based upon data-driven assessment of existing intellectual property portfolios at any given institutions? And if not, wouldn't a data-driven approach be better?
Unfortunately, you can't prove a negative, as the economists that we both fund and employ would tell me. So our data is based upon many economists, including well-known individuals like Paul Romer and others that we have funded, understanding and looking at outcomes for the economy based upon the amount of research inputs. As I noted when we began here this morning, there is no question on our part that the United States has done a phenomenal job of capitalizing on university innovation. We are also in a period of economic crisis and recovery, and we think that this is an opportune time for us to revisit. And as we have heard from an entrepreneur like Mr. Kane and Mr. Crandell, who have tried to commercialize technologies, the Kauffman Foundation is, as you know, entrepreneurs really don't have a voice. They don't have lobbyists. So we are unfortunately the home of every entrepreneur in the country who has tried to license technologies from universities. And while there are unbelievable, wonderful stories about innovations that have made it to the market, there are an equal number of unfortunate stories of long transaction times, as we have heard from Mr. Crandell and Mr. Kane, and unfortunately, many, many, many cases of mishaps where patenting has not occurred appropriately or broadly enough, and in fact, those technologies sit on the shelves of our universities today. So our goal is to help economic recovery through looking at the models that are out there today and looking for new pathways to market.
Thank you. Dr. Watkins, your institution is part of a major regional economic initiative focused upon research and subsequent commercial transfer. How confident are you that downstream economic impact, such as those projected by Austin Bioinnovation Institute, will be met? And can you elucidate a bit about the rationale employed to calculate these projections?
Oh, that's a great question. We are tremendously enthused about the potential of the Austin Bioinnovation Institute. Just briefly, it's a consortium made up of 3 local hospitals, the University of Akron and a related medical school, Northeast Ohio University College of Medicine. And I guess no model is proven until we go through it, but I think the thing that's most impressive to me about the model with the Austin Bioinnovation Institute is the people that are involved. And this is a business where it's people-driven, it's people that create the success. I spent the last 2 weeks working with the Institute on a particular proposal, and to see the ideas come forward, I'm very confident that we will see results. Now, I think the different models have to be reviewed. The universities are institutionalized, they're long-term. We hope the Institute is there long-term. But I think all these things need to be sorted out over time. But we are very confident about having that kind of relationship and having that type of expertise.
Thank you very much. Even though you're not from my district, you're close enough, so welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Fudge, and I recognize Dr. Ehlers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have very little in the way of questions. This is one of those panels that did so well at describing the situation. You answered most of my questions during your testimony. I do want to thank you for your work and your testimony. I'm frankly encouraged by what I heard. When I first got to the Congress, I was assigned by Speaker Newt Gingrich to try to clarify United States science policy, and so I, over the course of a year or two, produced a booklet basically labeled Toward a Good Science Policy, since writing a science policy would take a lot more time than I wish to devote to it. But it stimulated a good discussion. But that, probably one of the things we did was publicize the concept of the Valley of Death. And it seems to me that what most of you have done is either try to bridge the Valley of Death or fill it up so that you can stroll across it. And I commend you for that. That's a very good thing. One thing I'm interested in about, based on the work I've done in this, it seems to me that the American workers tend to be more innovative than the workers of other countries. By this, I'm talking about the line workers who, when given something to work on, to try to develop, to eventually manufacture, often come up with good ideas that can reinforce or mesh with the ideas that the basic researchers have done. And just when you're a member of Congress, you get invited to tour many different factories. I have not had the privilege or the benefit of touring factories in other countries, but is my impression right that America does better than most countries at the basic bench level, the industrial worker level, in contributing to the development of ideas, turning them into practical solutions and so forth? Or is that just my wishful thinking? Any comments?
Jump in.
Mr. Crandell?
Thank you. It's my sense that small, focused entrepreneurial groups that are at risk has really been the hallmark of successful innovation, and I think that continues in small companies. I think in larger companies where there tends to be more bureaucratic layers, they no longer embrace or look for the heroic effort. They look for a standard process which is eminently repeatable, and to some degree I think that's understandable. So in my experience, this paradigm of the small focus group that is really interested in the best ideas, sort of a true meritocracy, is alive and well. I think we need to do all the things we can to make those sorts of teams come together, and I think that's really where the solution lies to this commercialization challenge from the national labs and from the universities, is to continue to enhance the things that make that innovation in small groups succeed. Thank you.
Ms. Mitchell?
Yes, the data would show that the United States in the past has done a better job than other companies in terms of start and growth of new firms, and that job growth is literally based upon firms that are less than 5 years old. That being said, while we are looking in most cases at data that are 3 to 5 years old, I think it's extremely important, and I believe that Chairman Lipinski made comments to this in his opening remarks. It's extremely important to understand that our friends in China and India and other countries across the world, we have over 18,000 people who come through the Kauffman Foundation every year, and I can tell you almost every leadership member of Singapore, of China, and of India have been to the Kauffman Foundation and talked to us about economic growth through new firm formation, job growth, and entrepreneurship. And they are rapidly implementing policies that will work in order to support that. So I don't think that we should sit on our laurels relative to our ability to create new firms relative to technologies in our labs.
Thank you. Dr. Peterson, you testified that a key element of assembling an innovation ecosystem is that the university research should be explicitly driven by industrial needs. how is this an appropriate venue for NSF to fund? Because your mission is so fundamentally basic research as opposed to applied research. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. First of all, I think it's important to state that the NSF's mission is, as you correctly point out, first and foremost, the focus on support for basic research in science and engineering. And even within the engineering directorate, which has probably more substantial interactions with industry than any of the other directorates, we would not argue that point at all. But there is an element of our portfolio, investment in those kinds of research activities that take the discoveries that were generated from basic research and conduct research to the next level that would perhaps provide more evidence of potential marketability and commercialization that we feel is an important element of our portfolio. That is not to take away from investments in basic research, nor is it to redirect support or move the mission, the primary mission of the foundation, away from its fundamental mission of supporting basic research. But particularly for directorates like engineering, and by the way, I think it's not just engineering, but other directorates as well, that have an important social contract with industry or commercialization. In the education arena, for example, there are applications that are developed through research and education that are important for school districts and interactions throughout the country. So I think having that capability is an important part of the NSF portfolio.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back.
Maybe we'll get back to that a little later, maybe in my questioning. Chair, and I'll recognize Dr. Baird for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and I thank our witnesses. A fascinating topic, and I commend the chairman for raising this issue. It's something we've talked a fair bit about in this committee. I've met with a lot of entrepreneurs in academia and the private sector, and particularly in academia, one of the things that has come out is and as a former department chair, I sure see this, the internal reward structure within academia is antithetical to innovation development in the practical world. And by that I mean you publish a paper, which is you give it a conference that no one listens to, and then it sits on a shelf and makes no difference at all in the world. But you get tenure, and once you got tenure, you can then teach your students to publish papers that you can present at conferences, and you make no difference in the world, except that you get a nice salary and summer's more or less off. I don't think that's very constructive to our economy to have such bright people doing meaningless things, and I won't make it as a university professor again, my question is, isn't there some fashion in which we can seriously look at the reward structure for innovation within the university setting? And is there a way, Mr. Watkins, you have extensive recommendations in your document, Mr. Kane, all of you, but I'm particularly interested, is there some way to sort of leverage this, and either explicitly or implicitly, meaning can we not urge universities to say, if you've got a really bright, typically young, entrepreneurial faculty member, they may fail in their endeavor. But if I had a choice of presenting one meaningless paper or really vigorously digging into an alternative energy source that could transform the world, pick B and reward B. Our culture in universities is the opposite of how high tech gets going. So I'm going to throw that out there. There's some allusion to this in some of your comments, but I think we really need to push this. And so let me put it out and see what we can do with it.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. I'm really happy to be here today. I'd like to note in my testimony, I have a quote from Michael Crowell. The Kauffman Foundation was asked to co-host a summit at the White House, an energy innovation summit with the Department of Energy and a few other energies. And I can tell you this was a topic of vigorous discussion and agreement in that meeting. And Michael Crow, the president of the Arizona State University, was quoted as saying, "We must first design and implement new models of higher education to achieve the levels of connectivity, transparency, and speed of technology commercialization to accelerate the innovation pipeline, which would include, obviously, changing our incentive system as well. As you mentioned, not only do we not reward innovative faculty members for commercialization through tenure, but we also don't reward this in most federal agencies relative to funding. And I would like to use that to go back to a comment to address Mr. Eilers. You know, there seems to be, and this was much of a discussion at our Energy Innovation Summit, there seems to be this longstanding myth of basic and applied research that most industry leaders, and Nick D'Onofrio, the former head of technology at IBM, addressed this at our meeting, would tell you is in most cases not reality, and we would love to fund research that would help essentially identify the fact that there are a significant amount of innovations in the marketplace today that came from what one would consider very basic research.
I think that's true. But my guess would, I think that's true, but my belief is that those things happen because some really energetic, committed entrepreneurial faculty do things in spite of
Correct.
The university reward structure, not because of it. And I'd like it to be a because of thing. Mr. Watkins, you come from this background, and Mr. Kane, you've got some, and we'll get to Dr. Peterson, because I think NSF may have a way to leverage this. You've got a lot of money to give out, and maybe you could encourage people to do this.
The key is leadership, and change is difficult in an academic environment, and there's many things we do not want to change about an academic environment. Nevertheless, and I don't speak for all of higher education on this point, but having said that, I fully agree. We are seeing examples, although they're few and far between, of institutions where people have received tenure, have been promoted based on an entrepreneurial or a service component in addition to their research and teaching component. And we think this is significant. Again, it's people-driven, it's leadership-driven, and we've seen some great examples with some departments where they're really recognizing this. But you're right, we have a long ways to go, and it's a culture change. A culture adjustment is probably the better phrase that needs to occur, and it's going to be dependent upon leaders as well as faculty. Faculty control their own destiny. Administrators don't. And so as the faculty become more aware, as we teach and train and make them more aware of what this innovation system is all about, we think it'll come. It's just too slow for me.
It's way too slow given the problems we face. And my experience also, that of many entrepreneurs, is that the faculty who sit on the tenure review committees are often jealous of the applied people and actually penalize, rather. It's not only do we not reward it, we may actually penalize it. Mr. Kane or Mr. Crandell?
Thank you. I'll give you three very brief anecdotes that amplify that point. When we started Advanced Diamond Technologies, my two co-founders were scientists at Argonne. And even though the efforts that we underwent to get the company started were done with the full cognizance of management, their efforts were not recognized in their career trajectories. So in effect, they had two jobs for the duration of the amount of time that it took to get the company off the ground. Ultimately, one of them, who was a real high potential scientist at Argonne, quit to join our company full time, as he then deemed that professional opportunity to be better than staying in career research. And it's unclear to me whether that was a good outcome for Argonne or not. I know of a tenured professor at a Big Ten university who started a company and is now leaving also to join that company. And I know of another professor who was on the tenure track at a Big Ten university who had some very promising technology, and when I went to approach him, was basically told, leave that guy alone until he gets tenure, because we don't want to distract him with a startup company.
Thank you. QED.
Maybe just add a little bit to Neil's testimony in that I think these issues are solvable at large private research universities by providing the startup incentives to faculty that are interested in spinning companies off. They can own a piece of it. They can usually sit on the boards of directors. They can serve as advisors. They can stay at the university and continue to do great research. I think at public universities, there's more of what I would call a fishbowl effect, which is gets to a little bit to jealousy, but I think also to issues of hindsight, the 20/20 rule, where sometimes the problems of success from a conflict of interest standpoint are much more severe than the problems of failing quietly. And then I would say it's most severe, in my opinion, in the national lab system, where it's extremely difficult for a host of reasons, including conflict of interest, handling very thorny IP issues, and then the notion of holding equity in a startup which you spin off are still very, very difficult problems to solve and take an extraordinary amount of time to work through.
Thank you, Dr. Baird. My experience, and I probably shouldn't go too much into this, but I'll just say my experience, even in political science, certainly mirrors what Dr. Baird was speaking of, and the idea also that someone would there's a stigma to being too recognized in the popular press and ever getting your hands dirty by ever doing anything that had anything to do with real government or politics. So I think it's a university academia-wide issue, and I think it's going to take a real effort to try to change the environment. So that I will Chair will recognize Mr. Bilbray for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I just got to say, as a layman, the doctor's explanation of academia and the way it functions almost makes me start understanding quantum physics, because obviously a bunch of very intelligent people doing nothing is a parallel opposite universe from what we see here in Congress too often. So I think that I'm going to miss Brian's enlightenment on this committee in the future. I think that there was some discussion here that I'd like to get around to, and one of the things I want to clarify on is Mr. Watkins used the term government generically, and we do that all the time here. In fact, I'll tell you something. That's one thing I'm upset with my Republican colleagues, of talking about government as if all government is the same, and there isn't a separation in this country, which is, I think, one of our great unique advantages we have. But when you were talking about government, were you mostly talking about the federal government and every once in a while talking about state, or?
That is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we clarify that, because I think we, especially in this town, have a problem with being so generic. We forget about many of the universities are being financed by state governments, and the essentials in there. One thing that I really feel strongly about is that we don't look at what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And I get into this, Mr. Kane. Government always throws money at situations, and we threw tons of money at Mr. Langley when he was going to develop flight, and his planes kept falling into Potomac, which is kind of is an academic exercise on one side. I think that when we talk about the mix, what is practical science application, people might have thought that the Wright brothers' study in their wind tunnel with laminar flow was some abstract thing that may not have a practical application, but I think history has proven that was the difference, not the amount of resources, but the type of research that was done that made one program successful and the other one with massive amounts of government effort was very unsuccessful. The question I have to you, though, is that you talked about the importation of those mines that we may be able to use as a natural resource. Do you have any idea what kind of numbers annually we'd need to bring in, change our visa policy to be able to reflect that need?
I'm afraid I really don't have those numbers, but I will respond by sharing with you a strong sentiment that the government's perspective needs to change from picking winners to knowing that by stimulating scientific research, it's also stimulating the private sector to compete with those companies. And so in the case of the example that you gave, and I'm not familiar with the work that Langley did, but arguably if he created competition which spurred the Wright brothers on, then it was probably a wise investment.
He had connections in the House and the Senate that was able to get him that. But go ahead.
Well, I've made my point.
Okay.
If I may,
we shouldn't pick winners and losers, and that's one problem we've got to be very careful of here is giving into the pressures of lobbying rather than allowing the system to work, allowing science to work.
I learned authoritatively the other day, and perhaps Dr. Peterson can comment further on this, that in the SBIR programs at NSF, where we often compete, As you might expect, there's a lot of focus right now on creating technologies for clean water and water remediation. And we learned the other day that NSF rejected 70 proposals in the SBIR program for clean water technologies because they didn't think that they would be competitive in the commercial marketplace. No. So NSF's doing its job in ensuring that...
My question is getting back on this other issue about our visa policy. Would 5,500 scientists help in the process? Would that make a major impact on the effort?
Maybe I can jump in a little bit. I'm a past director of the National Venture Capital Association, and I think the number is really a couple 100,000 of the top scientific talent.
Annually?
Yeah.
Okay. That gives me a lot, because right now we have a program that's left over from the 40s called the lottery system, where we're actually just accepting people in based on a lottery, which I think any reasonable person would say really doesn't reflect the realities now. A 1940 program design, we've had a lot of changes, and to be able to continue that while we continue to deny access to high-tech scientists, I think are really important. So I just ask that, appreciate the fact that we've been able to back this up. And Mr. Chairman, I would just like to point out that when we talk about governments and the obstruction, we have problems too. My scientists at Scripps and at UC System developed algae strains for the production of fuel, clean fuel, which can be used for sewage treatment too, which most people don't talk about. But they had to pack up and leave California and create the manufacturing capabilities out of state because it wasn't legal to produce it under our regulations. And thank God that there wasn't somebody around for the Wright brothers to ask them what kind of permits they had to fly airplanes over the dunes at the time. But there's a lot of these kind of things that we need to work on, and hopefully the federal government can lead at helping science move along and also challenge the other forms of government to participate in being part of the answer and rather than being part of the problem. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bilbray. Chair will recognize himself now for 5 minutes. I want to make sure I make the point. We like to joke a bit about what's going on at our universities, but there certainly are the incredibly intelligent people doing a lot of great work at our universities, and it's not all. Mr. Baird talked about everyone who's been involved knows that at these conferences, all these papers, most of them aren't going to produce something really incredible, but there are some that will. And part of that is part of the whole research endeavor. So it's not just a question that it's not just that this is all hopeless. We have a lot of great people doing a lot of great work. And it's how do we better, first of all, incentivize the research towards things that will be contributing to our society, to our economic growth, and then what we're talking about here, especially where do we go from there to give the best opportunities, create the best environment where these will, really will spur economic growth and great products, jobs, companies. So I want to start with, I think Mr. Kane and Mr. Crandell. Mr. Crandell talked a little bit about this already, but I want to ask if you could provide us with some insights in how you identify promising investment opportunities and develop relationships with academic researchers. And second part of that, how do you think the NSF can help facilitate more interaction between researchers and entrepreneurs? And we're also talking, of course, venture capitalists. So start with Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second part of your question, which I think was directed to me, was how can NSF facilitate more interactions with entrepreneurs and stimulate startup businesses? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Thank you. I addressed some of that in my written testimony, and I'll reiterate it here. First, I think that NSF needs to be a catalyst for encouraging the development of business skills among STEM students. I know that that may not sound as though it's the primary mission, but I've observed firsthand in all of the companies that I've been involved with that the lack of what I'll call horizontal or soft skills among technical students coming out of school is a major impediment not only to their professional success, but ultimately to the success of the companies that get formed. That's number one. Number two, I do think that NSF has a mission and perhaps a voice in government to encourage university policy, as has already been discussed, to make sure that efforts that faculty undergo to help start businesses is not viewed neutrally or negatively on their tenure track or professional trajectories. I think if you do those two things, coupled with many other efforts that have been discussed here, I think you would remove the stigma, such as it were, among academics from pursuing startup businesses and instead have that activity be encouraged by the administration and have it be consistent with academic meritocracy. And if you did that, I think there'd be quite an explosion in new businesses.
Fair enough. I would perhaps make a couple of quick observations, and thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to speak on this. Fundamentally, companies are built around people. Even though we've been talking about patents and technologies, you need to find a way to develop these teams of scientists that have breakthrough ideas, of entrepreneurs that are excellent managers, and of investors that know enough about the things that they're investing in to be comfortable putting money behind those individuals to build these efforts. So in our experience at Arch, we've backed, I think in the last 25 years, over 120 companies. The vast majority are university or national lab related. I will say parenthetically, it's certainly not the easiest way to make a living, but it's what we know how to do, so that's what we're doing. It's a critical element to get the people that have the money and have entrepreneurial skills into the labs and develop those relationships with the leading scientists. And again, in my view, the easiest place to start is to look for the centers of excellence, the places where individual universities or research are at a global scale, and you can develop your own indexes to do that. You can look at publications, you can look at the size of programs. You can look at awards that faculty have won to triage the broad group of faculty at a university, and maybe identify the 10 or 15 that really have the big ideas. And then we spend a considerable amount of time talking to those individuals and having them tell us about the future. And then we look to build companies along the thrust lines that they tell us about. And then we have to go out and try and validate that with industry. And all that sounds probably very complicated and involved, and it is. And it may take 6 months or a year, and it takes some level of resources, what I would term very, very high-risk capital, to take the time and the effort to run down and understand the constraints that an industry application would impose on a breakthrough. So much of it's walking the halls, trying to spend time with the people that are the leaders, trying to identify them early. Second, we spend a considerable amount of time looking for that validation, because you clearly do not want to invest a ton of money and then hope it all works out. The hope model has been largely invalidated. And the last part would just be that we need to be able to capture strong intellectual property in order to enable that type of capital to come together. And that means the more you know about the industry application, the earlier, the better patent applications are probably going to result. So.
Mr. Crowell, you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to take a quick whack at that from the university perspective. I certainly agree with the comments from my co-panel members and Congressman Barrett and others about the importance of things like tenure policy, incentivizing faculty participation, rewarding success, and particularly impact in the tech transfer and innovation arena. But at the same time, I will also say that those types of things are the subject of policies and cultures and histories that are awfully hard to influence. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but we really need to keep after that. What I think, responding to your question about what the NSF could do, and from my perspective, is really focus on this translational or proof of concept space. I think they do a great job of funding basic research, as does NIH and other federal agencies. Where we really need to, I think, roll up our shirt sleeves and go elbow to elbow is to partner with the academic scientists, the technology transfer personnel, regional, local venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, industry representatives, so that we can have a very high-touch, high-contact, interactive process to be sure that we're taking science that really does have commercial and market potential and bringing the types of expertise together to be sure that the follow-on work is actually relevant to getting it out. That is, I think, an area of great need, and one where the NSF, through initial programs in PFI, the IUCRC, some of the programs that Dr. Peterson mentioned, have already sort of started to create that sort of an environment. At the end of the day, creating an ecosystem within the university is really what I'm talking about, in order to make it easy for faculty to participate, for them to see this as a logical part of their scholarly and intellectual endeavors. And I believe that the rewards and the recognition from that will follow in due course. Thank you.
As I've mentioned in my introductory remarks, we absolutely agree relative to proof of concept centers. One thing I would definitely want to underscore, and I think the NSF is one agency that has absolutely started to do this, but it needs to be done in a much bigger way. The Kauffman Foundation over the last 5 years has funded and worked collaboratively with entrepreneurs and venture capitalists in developing commercialization education programs, both in the energy space as well as in the biomedical device and the biotechnology area, and has reached out to what we thought were university graduate students across the country that might be interested in this. What was amazing to us is the interest level was at the level of the faculty, who were being asked to teach their students about commercialization but didn't understand commercialization themselves. And while we are a foundation, we don't have enough money to afford educating all university faculty across the country in science and engineering, as well as graduate students, and it is a trickle-down effect. And so I believe if we are interested in commercializing science at the level of our universities, we need to develop broad commercialization education programs. And frankly, I wouldn't even use the word. There was a wonderful woman that teaches in the Stanford Medical School that told me that she's been teaching a class there for 6 years, and her class is in the medical school, and she tells them, what I want to teach you is opportunity recognition and analysis, so that if something in the lab strikes you as market relevant, you have the skills to know how to analyze that and go out and find the closest entrepreneur that can help you take that to the commercial marketplace.
Thank you. Dr. Peterson, you have something to add there?
Well, if you would like me to.
We're speaking about the NSF.
Right. Yeah. My resume is up to date, and it may need to be after I answer some of these questions. But let me say, first of all, as the head of an engineering directorate and as a former engineering dean, I certainly am very sympathetic and I think understanding and appreciative of the importance of the entrepreneurial activities of faculty. And I do believe that through many of the programs that have been talked about here today, programs that I've mentioned at NSF, we are providing a culture and an environment in which those sorts of contributions are recognized and rewarded. And I can only say that it's been in my experience that, at least within communities like the engineering community, contributions to entrepreneurship are recognized. I think universities have a long ways to go with regard to, say, parity of understanding of an appreciation for those contributions in the same level that you would for other research endeavors, but I do think we've made some progress. I also think it's important to point out that even for those who perhaps don't believe that there is a mission at all for basic research, and I certainly don't subscribe to that, and I'm sure not any of you do either. But even if you accept that as a premise, there have been many important commercially viable ideas that have been developed through pure serendipity. Research concepts that were going in one direction and resulted in fantastic contributions for commercial application in quite a different direction. And I don't think you're going to get that without the support for basic research in science and engineering.
Dr. Ehlers, do you want to
If you'd yield me some time, I would like to just make a few comments.
I certainly will yield.
Especially picking up on what Dr. Peterson just said. The Langley example, which my colleagues from California gave, I noticed some puzzlement in the audience about what it was, but Mr. Langley was trying to build an airplane, and I'm not quite sure why he launched it over the Potomac. I guess he was confident it would fly, but it plunk. That could be regarded as a failed experiment, but when I was at Berkeley, I remember when Luis Alvarez was trying to investigate something by watching cosmic rays going through he was trying to locate a tomb in a pyramid by looking at the cosmic rays which went through and trying to find it. And he didn't. And newspapers said, "Isn't it terrible to not get a result?" He said, "No, I got a result. I now know where it isn't." And that's similar with the Langley case. His experiments proved how you should not build an airplane. And I think most of us who have worked in experimental science have uncovered that. I don't have the same dim view that my colleague from the West Coast has about the results. I've actually enjoyed all the experiments I did. I learned something from all of them, and I'm convinced the world is a better place because of them. Even though there were only 5 other people besides me who understand the results. But in fact, you learn a great deal by experiments that fail. I recall I spent four months on one experiment and discovered it simply could not be done because of the characteristics of that particular material. So science, I think failure makes science fun, because when something doesn't work, it's very frustrating, but trying to find out why it doesn't work is indeed very important to the advancement of science. And so I always take up the defense against laymen who, well, particularly, what was the senator's name who had the Golden Fleece Award? A number of those projects were very good projects. And you never know what you're going to learn in science. And you never know what potential commercial experiments you can perform with it that will really be productive, in fact, profitable. One great example is when AT&T was trying to establish a link across the Pacific Ocean to communicate by telephone to Asia. And they built this immense magnet because they were going to have the world's biggest transmitter, and it failed. However, E.O. Lawrence across the bay in Berkeley was looking for a great magnet, so he went over and said, "May I borrow your magnet?" He did, and produced the first large-scale cyclotron. So virtually every failure has a good side to it. And as long as the researcher still gets paid for it, I think it's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers. Chair will now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman Lipinski. This has been a very good hearing. This is an important hearing. And I don't want to be late. My daughter just graduated from 3rd grade, so that's why I'm late today. But it's doesn't take anything away from this important hearing. Dr. Peterson, could you tell me a little bit about the STAR metrics, what you're doing there, or anyone else that might have some interest in that? Where does it stand? Where is it going? I know there's a lot of information, and how hopeful are you that you really can bring this, together?
In the Social Behavioral and Economic Sciences Directorate, one of the primary program officers is focusing on this particular issue foundation-wide. It is broader than that activity. In addition to that, there are a number of ongoing activities looking at evaluation and assessment throughout the foundation, looking at not only the metrics in this program, but also other metrics. I think we have, particularly within the directorates like engineering, we've been pretty good at evaluating programs that have industrial ties or other activities, but perhaps not as good at evaluating long-term what the overall outcome of our investments have been in certain specific areas of fundamental research. And so we are looking at ways that we could do this in a more organized and quantitative fashion.
I think as we go forward, obviously, if we're going to maintain our lead technologically, in my third-year-old daughter and Brian's twins are going to not inherit a national standard of living less than their parents, then we're going to have to continue to invest. But we're going through a difficult time right now in terms of dollars available. And so I think that we need this kind of research that would show us that the dollars are invested wisely. And if something isn't paying off, then we need to go somewhere else. I was at a interparliamentary meeting this last week, and there were some parliamentarians from the EU that are very interested in this too, and doing something on a joint basis. So, does anyone else want to add to this? And could you also tell me a little more about what kind of time frames that you have?
Yeah, actually, let me say that we are also collaborating with the activities in the UK and EU in general in this. And let me just articulate one challenge to this process, and this is not meant to excuse lack of progress or anything like that, but just to kind of explain what some of the challenges are. I think we're all in agreement that we really do want to get a better grasp on just what we have accomplished globally in our investments in specific research areas, not just with respect to commercialization, but just with respect to advancing any particular research field. One of the challenges, however, is that oftentimes, particularly when you're looking at commercialization, you don't really see the fruits of those developments until long after the support for that particular project has come and gone. Sometimes it takes 10 or 15 years for certain commercial products to develop from the basic research ideas. So you can do assessment and evaluation for example, while NSF is supporting projects for continuing projects, or you can take an historic look back at the ensemble of programs that you've supported and try and determine how your investments have paid off in that respect. So those are the two challenges that we're trying to face.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm a little skeptical of just being able to get your arms around it. And when we certainly don't want to, I mean, I hope when I say skeptical, it's not that I don't want to see success, but I think it's going to be very difficult, and we don't want to get into a situation where we are disincentivizing basic research for the more applied research where those metrics will be easier.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. And as I said, we understand that it is perhaps easier to make those kinds of evaluations when you can look at quantitative specifics like patents or licenses or companies spun out and so forth, and perhaps not as easy on the basic research side, but it's nonetheless as important.
What is your time frame, and are you 90% or 20% optimistic about being able to accomplish this?
Congressman, could I get back to you on that? I can tell you where we stand right now with regard to our activities in the Engineering Directorate. We have an evaluation and assessment group that's going to deliver a report to us this summer. And I do know that Julia Lane and her colleagues working on the STAR Metrics program have similar timeframes, whether that is sort of an interim report or an interim result or a final report, I'm not sure. But I'd be happy to get a specific answer to that question for you and get back to you.
Anyone else want to give a quick response there? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Gordon. I'm going to officially, I guess, start a second round of questions here, and Chair will recognize Dr. Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to underscore, I'm well versed in basic research and the importance of that. I've studied the history of science, taught science research methods. You know, Feynman's got this great thing about the pleasure of finding things out, this wonderful personal anecdote of trying to figure out the relationship between the rate at which a plate was spinning and its wobble, and that led to some fundamental physics. I get it. But I've also seen too many times where the application, when you ask, so what? The explanation comes as rationalization, not as reason. And it's, well, I guess you could, and somebody's done a line of research, and they haven't really thought about the applications. We've got a $13 trillion debt, $1.3 trillion to $1.5 trillion deficit. The climate's overheating. The oceans are acidifying. We've got energy challenges. We've got healthcare challenges, drug-resistant diseases, et cetera, and the public's paying taxes for this. Now, we've got to fund basic research. I'm passionate. I have defended it at the risk of my career, quite literally, on the floor of the House in the face of negative earmarks by our friends on the other side of the aisle. So I get it. But the community has to change its perspective as well. And I want to drill down on this a bit. Has anyone done a content analysis? And maybe, Ms. Mitchell, this is germane to your work. A content analysis of the tenure and promotion criteria of major universities as incorporating the themes we're addressing here. In other words, look at them, read them. Do they give you any credit for doing this stuff?
No, I don't believe that analysis has been done. I do know that there are at least 2 universities over the last couple of years that have changed their tenure requirements. Unfortunately, I don't know that we're even going to see an outcome from that. I mean, my fear of adding patents as a component of tenure is that it could lead us to down the road of over-patenting inappropriately.
Yes, true. Good point. I'm not saying you add it as a mandatory thing, but what I'm trying to say is you get some flexibility to this process so that if somebody spends a couple of years working on an actual applied, and it doesn't have to be commercial, by the way, because I'm a big believer in supporting nonprofit entrepreneurial efforts, which are excluded now from our SBIR money and shouldn't be. But it's the applied, the bench work that it goes beyond the basic research. So I just would urge us to try to see what we can do on that. And maybe there are some best practices that have really spawned some successes. Second thing I want to ask about is, so we've got the basic NSF model, which is as good as there is in the world, and we've done some great stuff with that. But it's been mentioned a little bit. So what's the logical next sequence? You know, if this were a manufacturing process, and I know it doesn't work like manufacturing, blah, 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 but you still have to have a sequence where something starts here and it gets to here. And we talk about the valley of death in terms of capital. But what about the valley of death in terms of intellectual, structural assistance? And some of you have alluded to it. My point would be, let's suppose NSF gives a grant to some bright, energetic person. They do some basic research, and then they have the opportunity analysis. That was a felicitous phrase somebody used earlier. What's next? What do we have structurally that is next so that we would say to them, once you do this, you go here, and that can lead you to here?
Let me just give you a very brief answer with regard to what's next as far as NSF is concerned. You've heard in a number of the testimonies this morning that there sometimes is a disconnect between the technology and the entrepreneurship of the faculty and the ability of that faculty member's institution to support the potential commercialization. I don't believe NSF is in a position of making wholesale changes and investments in tech transfer offices and legal aspects and so forth and intellectual property offices. But what we can do is recognize that as part of the criteria for next steps in support, one looks not only at the technical content and the technical strength, but also the university's capacity to handle these kinds of entrepreneurial activities. So in other words, there'd be a view of both the technical strength as well as the university structure as well. So we haven't fully formed the criteria for this kind of a solicitation, but I can tell you that's going to be an important element if the FY11 budget is approved for us going forward in our partnerships for innovation, where a component of that will look to support institutional center-like activities. Again, not to provide money for lawyers or tech transfer officers and so forth, but to make a clear statement that from the point of view of NSF, it's equally important to have strong technical background as well as institutional support for this kind of activity.
Excellent point. I've got to run in just a second. Can I ask the chair for a 30-second indulgence? When we passed the America Competes Act out of this committee a few weeks back, there was an amendment offered that would have said the following. I'm reminded of Mr. Kane's testimony. The amendment said none of the money authorized by the program, which included National Science Foundation, ARPA-E, et cetera, could go to anybody who was not a United States citizen, let alone legal resident. I'm just asking you, good idea or bad if you want to stimulate the American economy? We'll just go down. Dr. Peterson?
Very bad idea.
Ms. Mitchell?
Very bad idea.
Mr. Crowell?
Very bad idea.
Mr. Watkins?
Bad.
Mr. Crandell?
Bad.
Mr. Kane?
Ditto.
Thank you very much. I just would insert that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I concur, by the way. We had the votes. The four sweetest words in the English language are we have the votes. In this case, we had the votes. We defeated the amendment, but it would have been destructive to so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. I think I knew where you were on that one before you said that. But I'm really looking forward to your new career here to completely remake the American university system.
Countless universities are looking forward.
Thank you. I just want to. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. We'll see how. I don't want to keep this going for too much longer. Although this has just been a wonderful opportunity, and I would like to continue this, and we'll see what we can do formally and informally. Continue this discussion. But one thing I just want to make sure I wanted to ask here is a number of you have voiced concern over the ability of institutions to attract and retain the necessary level of expertise, talking about universities, within a institution's technology transfer office. I have, just anecdotally, and I have not looked into this, and it's something I've often asked but haven't really dug into it. I've noticed that so many more universities seem to be having a technology transfer office, and my understanding of it is these vary tremendously in what exactly they do. In some ways, it seems like it's just sort of it's a fad in some ways. Because I think that there's an understanding, fad not in a bad way, but universities are seeing other universities do this, and they also see the opportunity to make money in this. And this is not a bad thing, but I think we need to be focusing on how to do this correctly. In one thing I want to ask for is if you have any suggestions on how we can incentivize, increase the recruitment of qualified individuals to an institution's technology transfer office. I mean, specifically Mr. Crowell and Mr. Watkins and Ms. Mitchell, I wanted to ask about that. What in general can be done? What makes a good technology transfer office?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you very much for that wonderful question, and obviously it's a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I think your observation is correct that more and more universities are getting into the technology transfer business. You mentioned one reason was that many presidents or perhaps boards of trustees see the opportunity to make money. Let me add one more, and that is many are being pressured to do it because their governors, their legislatures, their regional economic development entities are really wanting to partner with the universities, no matter how large or small, no matter how intense the research infrastructure may be, in order to capitalize on the innovation capacity that exists there. So there is a real push to create a resource and not just the major research universities, but regional, very small universities in North Carolina. I think most of the 16 campuses of the UNC system, for example, now have a technology transfer office. Those research budgets range from $750 million a year to less than 10. So you might argue that each one doesn't need one, but when a brilliant idea comes up at the university with $10 million, what are you going to do to get it out? Specifically with respect to the training and attraction and retention of really good people in the field, whether you're talking about a large, well-established program or a relatively new one, there are a number of resources certainly available. Autumn, there's certification programs, there's the Licensing Executive Society. More and more business schools are teaching courses related to product commercialization, intellectual property management, sort of the key concepts and key principles that a qualified technology transfer officer needs to know. There's certification programs starting to appear. There's a certified licensing professional process underway within just the last few years that's seeking to bring a level of sort of common practice, if you will, and common levels of ethics and understanding and of competence and experience if you have those initials after your name. Those programs are quite new, but I think it's an effort that's underway to perhaps address a problem or a concern that's underpinning the question that you have asked. Your question about what makes a good technology transfer professional, I think the slate is absolutely wide open on that issue. I've been in the field 23 years, as I mentioned. I've seen some of the best people have come out of science and with no business background. Others have come out of MBA programs where they had to learn enough science to succeed. The fact is that there are a large number of skills and functions and attributes necessary to manage IP, to negotiate deals, to assess value, to understand markets, to interact within the innovation ecosystem to bring value and results to the process. And I think a one-size-fits-all or a specific prescription on where those people come from is probably not wise or not available. So thank you.
I'd just like to comment here, Mr. Crandell being on the panel and also having a rich history in venture capital, the role that a venture capitalist takes is looking at very early stage technology and trying to determine the market relevance and bringing it to market, and that's not dissimilar to the role that our current technology licensing offices take. And Mr. Crandell, in his role, and I would assume the expertise of many of the people on his staff, and the amount of money that they probably are paid in the free market is significantly different. And that is why I'll refer back to comments in my testimony, is that we at the Kauffman Foundation believe that there should be a free market directive and that would lead university technology licensing offices to specialize or in many cases turn to outside agents with appropriate expertise. In some cases, a university might not need to, other than administrative reasons, have their technology licensing office, but could continue to earn licensing revenues and less the fees charged to outside TLOs. Federal agencies funding research need to be active in reviewing these institution-specific technology commercialization practices, somewhat similar to what we just heard here. But most importantly, I think, and this discussion happened a little bit earlier, but not to the degree that it should, is how do we measure the performance of that office? And I think that needs to drive what kind of people we need to be doing, completing this role. And I would put forward that performance should first be measured by innovations moved to market, not revenue generated. And that we really need to address this question of how are we evaluating the outcomes and measuring the outcomes of university innovation in addition to the kind of people that are in this role. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I add one quick remark? I've encountered many licensing offices, and what I can tell you is that irrespective of the background, the tech transfer officers who seem to be most successful are the ones who are able to earn the trust of the professors. The ones who, when the professors think that they are acting in their best interests and are easy to work with, etc., those are the ones who are successful. When the professors are hostile to the process, it doesn't matter what the qualifications are of the tech transfer officer.
Thank you. Mr. Watkins?
I would echo the concept of trust there. It's absolutely essential. But when I started in this business in the mid-'80s, I attended what was called the Society of University Patent Administrators for the 1 year. And that kind of shows where this industry began. We were administrators of patents. That evolved into AUTUM, the Association of University Technology Managers. And the question is, what does it go to next? And I think there is another generation that's emerging that really has to do with more of a full service. We're calling it kind of an innovation service provider. And it does much more than just the licensing, but it looks at the resources, it looks at what's happening in the community and the industries with the technologies, and has ideation sessions and figures out how best to deal with those. My experience is that the best technology transfer professionals are those who have had experience in industry, have had experience in developing and commercializing technology, have experience in the universities where they appreciate that culture. They have had touch with venture capital, and oftentimes you don't find all that in one person, but you need to bring them in. And so I think that's why a model similar to what we've done of bringing in the community resources and the retirees has really leveraged our internal talent to where I think we can be more effective. So I'm very excited about the future of this industry, but I think we've come a long ways. We have a good way to go, but I'm very hopeful.
Thank you. Any other
I maybe put a finer point on one aspect of this, and that is that commercialization or technology commercialization is a broad term, and in the context of a university or a national lab, there are many relatively routine administrative functions that I think the compensation structures and the incentives are probably adequate for today, in part because these functions get performed. It's not to say they can't be improved, but if you look at the best university licensing operations, they do get these things done in reasonable periods of time and make good choices on things like patent claims. The crux of it, in my opinion, to really take the commercialization process and increase it by a multiple is focused around a little bit more difficult challenge, which is the one of starting companies out of university research. Starting companies, period, is an incredibly difficult task. Starting companies out of universities is even more difficult. And if you're good at that, you're going to create a huge amount of value. And if you don't want to be rewarded, or if psychic utility is the thing that you're chasing, then you may stay in that position forever. Most individuals that have families that hope to increase their wealth over time are going to look for market rate compensation. So I don't think we have to change the entire compensation structure of the commercialization effort. At least that wouldn't be the first step in my mind, or to study it. I think we need to look at the folks that are doing the incredibly heroic efforts to help pull these companies together, to make these teams of entrepreneurs, scientists, and investors. And we need to find a way to get those up to market rates in order to help the process be as sustainable and productive as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony today. I know I could stay here all day, but I don't think we will be doing that. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for answers to any follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witnesses. And at that, the witnesses are excused and the hearing is now adjourned.